A while back when I was looking into the Oblivion testing stuff, as well as the weird name mix-ups, there was always this one other topic that I would return to. Oblivion's DLCs. Now, why would both testing content and inconsistent names be tied to the DLCs? Well, because these DLCs have some interesting behind the scenes info. That's why. These small, insignificant add-ons probably have more of an interesting background than they are interesting to play. I do want to shortly address the creation of this video though. I don't think I've ever mentioned this, but I am, for all intents and purposes, a journalist. I studied it in college and have some actually published articles. Of course, I don't have any that are all that special, and they're all Belgian-centric. And you won't catch me ever referring to myself as a gaming journalist due to the negative connotations, and due to the fact that I honestly don't really care all that much about the world of journalism. I like the freedom this gives me a lot more. However, I did want to write an actually informative article about the creation of Oblivion's DLCs. My first draft was a bit too mean-spirited, I found, so I completely redid it in a more neutral tone. Seeing as Kotaku has claimed to be willing to publish anything, and their site clearly shows this, I gave them a shot and sent them my pitch and the article. And bam! Nothing ever came of it. And after a while, I honestly didn't care about publishing it anymore. So I just put it up on my Medium, and that's where it stayed. There, and in the back of my mind, of course. When I saw the positive reaction on my lore retconning video, even though retconning might have not been the right word, I thought to myself, hey, maybe it's time to release this beast to the outside world. And that's how this video came to be. If you want, you could say that I simply repurposed my mostly unseen article into a video. And that's also the angle we're taking today, as Oblivion's smaller add-ons basically all share the fact that they were repurposed from other content. So let's dive into that rabbit hole starting now. I suppose if we go chronologically, we need to mention that Oblivion wasn't the first Elder Scrolls game that had these very small add-ons. No, that was actually Morrowind. Morrowind is the main culprit in finding out why Oblivion's add-ons are so weird and feel so tagged on. In Morrowind, the base game received 8 of these small plugins, as well as 2 bigger expansions. The latter added a lot of new armor, weapons, quests and even locations to the game, while the former often did way less. For example, one of these plugins just added some atmospheric details and noises to a single area in the game, while the others just added some armor sets or an arrow shop. In today's gaming climate, that wouldn't really fly. And even back then, this would have been seen as lackluster, if not for one thing. They were completely free of charge. A couple of years later, and it seemed that Bethesda wanted to do the same thing with Oblivion. 2 bigger expansions and a multitude of smaller stuff. Even back before the game's release in 2006, a strategy was already created to keep supplying the game with more content. When asked about plugins in an interview, Vice President of Marketing and Public Relations Pete Hines stated that horse armor is definitely one you can expect. We've got 3 or 4 others that are in the works. But again, until they pass the test of being worthy for release, we prefer not to comment on them. Because if we decide we're not gonna do them, someone's always gonna be upset. In another interview before the game's release, he elaborated on both horse armor and another DLC concept. We already have plans to do downloadable content on a regular basis, once a month, couple times a month with different levels of content. 2 of the ones we know we're doing already right at the beginning. One is horse armor. So you can own horses in the game, and one of our downloadable things is so you can buy different kinds of armor to put on. You know, you're riding around and you've got all this cool Daedric armor on, you wanna have something cool for your horse too. So you can buy this downloadable stuff that'll let you go to different places and buy armor for your horse. And then the other one is something we did in Daggerfall, which is holidays. So different towns in the game will have different holidays at different times of year, and you can go there and get perk bonuses. You can get special artifacts. One of the towns will have Jester's Day. So on Jester Day you can go to town and all the crimes in town are 50% off. So you get caught doing a crime and a guard arrests you, you pay half as much as you normally would. Because it's kind of everybody screwing around being a goofball day. So just different stuff like that you can do that adds to your existing game. You know, gives you some different experiences, whether there is new stuff to put on or new things to do. And by now you've probably already realized 2 things. The released horse armor doesn't work like Pete describes here, and holidays were never a thing at all. So what's all that about? It appears that at some point before the release of the horse armor pack, it got simplified, now only sporting 2 available sets of armor without any sort of special requirement. The rest is history. The pack launched and instantly became the laughingstock of the gaming world for years to come. It can be assumed that the reception was so bad that the Holidays pack and the other packs mentioned by Pete were silently canned in order to get some revisions done. But now comes the interesting part. That horse armor? That was always meant to be included in the vanilla game from the start, as traces in the game and its files still show us. Do you remember the March Rider in Shadenhall? That's a shop that sells weapons and armor, despite the name. Even so, owner Tertia Vidusha will gladly talk about horses when asked about town, and the most damning evidence is this rumor line about her.
Her knowledge of armor is really impressive.
At least that's how the female rumor goes. The male one is slightly different.
Her knowledge of horse armor is really impressive.
And there we have it. It seems that originally Tertia sold horse armor rather than humanoid armor, which, based on what we know, makes a ton of sense, as Bethesda once again did minimal work to actually cover this change up. We can see the rec script note attached to this rumor, indicating it was rewritten and re-recorded at some point, and the same thing probably happened with the other rumors, as the same note is present there, although both lines are the same there. Of course, this opens up the floodgates to speculation. Was Tertia meant to be the only horse armor vendor in the whole of Cyrodiil, or were there others? It seems unlikely, and if there were, all of the evidence of their existence was removed a lot better. I should also mention the dialogue added by these add-ons, because none of it is unique. All characters get some spliced lines to fit the basic narrative. If you're lucky, they might even be spliced in a good way, but that's not always the case. For Snack at the Stables though, they just picked a lot of generic dialogue to repurpose. Keep that in mind, because I'll be diving deeper into this at the very end. Then there's also the cancelled Holidays DLC, which as a concept was reused from Daggerfall, but as a gameplay addition was likely reused from a cut base game feature. Though I won't go in depth about it here, since I've already got a video doing just that, and I feel that I already have enough overlap as is. So the next download that would delight us is the Orrery. And once again, there's a very strong indicator that this was repurposed vanilla game content, as despite the orrery being off limits there and the cell not being finished, its mere existence is noteworthy, as the relevant NPC Botiel has lines for being in said cell already present in the vanilla game, where they of course never get accessed. Everything that actually is new isn't anything to write home about, unless you like writing about basic name swapped items or reused vanilla dialogue. Wizard's Tower and Thieves' Den, the next two DLC to get released, actually aren't reused vanilla content, or not entirely. While their concepts didn't exist in the vanilla game, some test cells were reused for their world spaces, resulting in some strange bugs, which is arguably worse than just reusing vanilla content present in the files. Next on the list is Maroon's Razor, which may just be one of the most blatant cases. In an interview from last year, we learned that the entire dungeon was just repurposed from a creation the level designers made while goofing around. While this in itself is already quite lazy, the item the DLC is named after, Maroon's Razor itself, was actually present in the vanilla game all along. I really want to meet the person responsible for creating a unique artifact that's tied to the game's main antagonist just to decide to not include it in that game. And then there's Vile Lair, which might just be the first DLC that doesn't have any clear signs of repurposing content, besides more vanilla dialogue of course. Yet, because this is an Oblivion DLC, it doesn't escape the general bugginess that comes with that title. Spell Tomes is just a simple excuse to implement some more spells into the game, and it should have been included from the very start. It's not hard to imagine this was also scrapped vanilla content, although there are no remnants of this in the files, if that was the case. It does however reuse some spells that went unused in the vanilla game, so there's still that. Oh, and there were some tomes created for the expansion that go unused as well. So yeah, Bethesda being Bethesda I suppose. And then Fighter Stronghold was the last of the game's player home DLC and the last DLC in general. It's weird that Bethesda would release this more than half a year after the release of the Shivering Isles, which would have been the perfect send-off for Oblivion. But now it just has this. Fighter Stronghold is exactly the same as its predecessors. It introduces some bugs, gives the player another fantastical home tied to a fantasy class, and reuses vanilla dialogue while introducing nothing really worthwhile. Well, Rona Benanius is here, so it holds a special place in my heart in the worst way possible, but this DLC actually holds another very cool secret hidden in its files. You know how I've said that all these expansions reuse vanilla dialogue? Well, this one's no different, but here, all the developer notes for splicing said dialogue still remains intact. You can clearly see which lines were spliced, if there were multiple, or just see which previous line was reused if it was singular. This happened in other DLC too, but not to this extent. Every single line has the note attached. If you really wanted to, you can even use this information to create better splices with the newer available technology. But I mean, that's just putting a band-aid on a dead body, so why even bother? Oh, and it should also be noted that this DLC likely would have never existed if it wasn't for the removal of Spy Rock, an old Imperial fort that was meant to play a role in Gerald and Doran's removed quest. Spy Rock was meant to appear at this location, so at the very least, Battlehorn Castle was meant to appear somewhere different. Although I more so get the feeling that Bethesda just wanted to fill this empty cell up with something. So thanks guys for giving us this DLC as a send-off, I guess. Of course, Shivering Isles and Knights of the Nine aren't present here because they're both more well thought out expansions and not small bonuses. And neither seems to be based on discarded ideas from the vanilla game, unlike for example Skyrim's Dawnguard DLC. While it is kind of nice to see how this DLC came to be, one might argue that if they had never existed, we wouldn't miss out on much. Would people remember Oblivion more fondly if it only had those two big expansions? I don't really know, but it is an interesting thought. What do you think? And how much of this information were you already aware of? Please let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.